Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone had a great holiday. Today, I'm super excited to be back with you guys. I'm going to bring you a little bit different video than I have been doing the last couple of weeks. Today, we're going to get deep in depth on some of the off-season news, buzz, headlines, stories that have kind of shaped this off-season, and we're going to go through some news that I think is going to be way more important than people think. We're going to add in some context in between and how we should be attacking some of these, running back rooms, wide receiver rooms, how I think these quarterback battles are going to shape, these wide receiver rooms and the trickle down effect they can have on some of these players, and how us dynasty managers can take advantage of these, you know, these buy windows, these sell windows, and just, putting our teams in the best possible position to win this upcoming season or rebuild and kind of get your roster ready for 2026. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Okay, so let's dive right into the first topic today that I think is really, really going overlooked this offseason, and one that I don't think a lot of people are talking about enough. And it's going to be the Patriots backfield manned by both Ramondre Stevenson and Trevion Henderson. And why I think this topic is important is because a lot of people seem to assume that Trevion Henderson is going to right away take over the majority of this backfield. We know that he was an early second round pick, you know, highly productive at Ohio State, coming off a national championship, produced early on in his career at Ohio State, just a really, really good running back prospect is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of people are losing sight of, just how much of a role Stevenson's going to have, at least early on to the midpoint of this season, in terms of the early down work and possibly stealing goal line touches that we had hoped were going to be given to Trevion Henderson. I want to point this out. I do think that Henderson is going to have the third down role. He's going to have, the receiving role out of the backfield. We know how great he is as a pass blocker, and coaching staffs are going to love that about him. And I think that is going to, I think that is going to play into his favor in terms of, down the stretch of the season and how much they trust him, because they can leave him out there on three down, or they can leave him out there on all three downs, and he can be trusted, especially with, a young quarterback like Drake May. And the reason why I think this situation is so important is because I think too many times us dynasty managers, we get super impatient with, players who, especially rookies who aren't producing early on in the season. We've been spoiled the last couple of years with, the Brian Thomas Jr.'s, the Jamar Chases, the Malik Neighbors, some of these guys like who have come out and just produced right away. But at the running back position, more patience is needed. And pointing that out right now, about a month and a half before the season, is super important, because we need to realize that Trevion Henderson is most likely going to produce more down the stretch. It's going to be a lot like Devon Achan's rookie year, where, if you remember, he was a healthy scratch before he blew up for 50 points and took over that Miami backfield. And even kind of a perfect example is with Jahmyr Gibbs. David Montgomery was there. They had signed it before they even drafted Gibbs in the 2023 draft. And so I think the same thing can be said for Trevion Henderson, who, Ramondre Stevenson, we know the Patriots gave him an extension last year. He's going to have a role. He's not going to be ignored in this backfield. He's going to get some of the early down work. He's going to get some of the goal line work. So having patience with the situation is super, super important. And us dynasty managers should take advantage of the early panic that some of the managers are going to have who own Henderson, and buying him, week 3, week 4, where he hasn't produced very much because he's splitting 50-50 backfield with Stevenson. It's going to be a huge buy window for us. So knowing that now and knowing that before going into training camp is something that is super important, and diving into context is always super great. So with this Patriots running back room, it's important to know, like I'm saying, that Stevens is going to have a role, but Henderson is most likely going to produce down the stretch, and his best numbers are not going to become early on in the season. So just don't panic. Don't sell Henderson. Don't do anything rash or irrational. Just stay patient, guys. Okay. And then when that buy window opens up, pounce on it. So just giving you guys a heads up now, diving into a headline that I don't think a lot of people are paying enough attention to, and giving you some context into how this could really shape the 2025 season, because it's super important. So let's stay ahead. Don't panic. Hold Trevion Henderson if you have him. Be patient and just, wait for that production down the stretch. Okay, so the next headline we're going to get into is the 49ers wide receiving room. And we're going to talk first a little bit about Brandon Ayuk and his injury. Obviously, we know he's coming off a torn ACL and MCL, which is pretty serious injury this past season. And there's a headline that came out that he could possibly be looking at a trip to the PUP list for the beginning of the season. And I think to go quickly into Brandon Ayuk's, as a dynasty asset, I think if you're holding him and you're rebuilding, I think he's a perfectly fine dynasty asset to hold. I think you should be patient with him. I think he's an incredibly good player when he's on the field, but we might not see his best play until the second half, towards the end of the season, and maybe going all the way to the 2026 season next year. So I think if you have him, hold him. Don't worry about it. But if you're competing, I think it's smart to pivot off of him. I think if you can get a guy of equal value, you don't have to give up much at all, or if you can just pivot to another guy who's going to slot into your flex and give you the same amount of production that he would if he was healthy, I think it's incredibly smart to do. But what I really want to talk about is Ricky Pearsall and Jauan Jennings, and who is going to be the wide receiver one in this San Francisco offense with Brandon Ayuk, easing into the offense or, not on the field a lot of this season. And the reason I say that is because the San Francisco offense, I think, is going to be back this year. They got, hopefully, barring injury, Christian McCaffrey on the field most of the year, who's one of the best running backs in the NFL when he's healthy. And we all know what George Kittle does. He's awesome. He's really the wide receiver one in this offense, but in terms of, just who's going to get the majority of the looks at the position, Pearsall and Jennings, it's important to dissect this, this type of comparison, because I think whoever comes out on top is going to be a huge player into, who wins you leagues in 2025. So I'm going to give you my opinion into who I think is going to be, the player that is going to come out on top. And I think it's going to be Jauan Jennings if I had to make a bet on it. I mean, if you look at his over under on Underdog, I mean, he's at 924 and a half receiving yards, I believe. And I mean, we saw Jauan Jennings break out last year. I understand he was a, fourth, fifth year breakout, but the underlying metrics of Jauan Jennings do not lie. He had a 26 and a half targets per route run this past season, a 2.26 yards per route run, almost an 11% first downs per route run. These are all top of the league numbers in terms of the wide receiver position. I think he played about 15% more on the outside this past season. So, if he has that X wide receiver role, I think he's got that locked down. He's a phenomenal blocker. Kyle Shanahan trusts him a ton. So Jauan Jennings is a guy I think is a huge buy with this Ayuk injury, this Ayuk news. And he can be a guy, just like he did last year, that gives you big numbers from one of the best offenses in the league and is going to be super important, especially how cheap he is. And slotting him into your flex is awesome if you're on a competing team. If you're looking for a guy who can produce some pretty big numbers, first half of the season, 70% of the season in your flex spot, Jauan Jennings is the perfect guy to go after. But I can't acknowledge, and if you have Ricky Pearsall, I wouldn't be too worried. I think that he has some enormous upside this next season, especially if he emerges as the wide receiver one. I didn't love what I saw this past season. I know we had this off the field thing where he got shot, and there was a whole thing where he didn't really get a chance to integrate himself into this offense and really get used to the NFL speed and just the physicality of it. So I think Pearsall has some very, very big upside, and I can acknowledge that, but what we saw from Jennings last year, the underlying metrics just don't lie. And Jennings can be a huge contributor in 2025 and be someone who really shapes the season and who helps you win leagues. So if you're looking at this wide receiver room, I think Jauan Jennings is the safest bet, especially looking back at what he did last year and being Brock Purdy's wide receiver one in this offense. Whoever it's going to be super important. So I'm buying Jauan Jennings. I don't mind buying Ricky Pearsall too. I think he's going to be just fine. I don't think that these underdog over unders, these Vegas lines are perfect. I don't think they're gospel, but it tells us, they kind of give us an idea of who is going to be contributing at least, more than others. And Jauan Jennings is the safest one to me, and the numbers back it up. So I'm buying Jennings. I don't mind buying Pearsall. I acknowledge his upside, but it's important to, you know, as dynasty managers, we love upside, but at the same time, I don't think we saw enough from Pearsall last year to really bet on him for the 2025 season. So until IU gets back, Jennings is the best bet, and the wide receiver one for Brock Purdy could be incredible value at this price. in 2025 and winning your leagues. And I'm trying to give you guys the edge wherever I can. So Jauan Jennings is a guy you need to go buy right now. He is not expensive whatsoever. There's a lot of guys out there who just think it's a 1 year wonder. I don't think so. So go out there, get Jauan Jennings, be patient with Brandon Ayuk. But if you're competing, sell him off and just, I want to give you guys a little in depth on, just this news and how I think it's the trickle down effect is going to have on this wide receiver room. Okay, let's talk about the Chicago Bears. Similar to San Francisco, I think this is going to be one of the offenses that I'm going to want to have as many pieces of in 2025, than any other offense in the NFL, because I think it's going to be super important in determining, however many pieces I have on my team. I think there are going to be a lot of league winners on it. So I really want to talk about Luther Burden, the second round pick out of Missouri, who the Bears took at pick 37, I believe. And why I want to talk about him is because I think he's going pretty under the radar in terms of his soft tissue injury that he had in early minicamp and had him miss a lot of time in early minicamp. And why I think this is super, super important and a lot of people aren't paying enough attention to is because he's missing a lot of valuable time of learning the playbook, forming a relationship with his quarterback in terms of, being in rhythm and gaining trust from his head coach. Ben Johnson has been pretty vocal about how disappointed he's been with Luther Burden missing time, although he knows it's not his fault that he had an injury flare up. But I think he's incredibly correct in terms of, how important this time is, especially for rookies coming in, learning the NFL, getting up to speed. Once again, learning the playbook. It's something that contributes to a lot of these rookie wide receiver seasons and, how they shape out. And I think another similar situation is kind of what we saw from JSN. And while I don't think these guys are the same caliber prospect whatsoever, I love JSN coming out of Ohio State, but I also like Luther Burden coming out of Missouri. And realistically, they weren't taken that far apart. JSN was late first round, Burden was early second round. But if we remember, JSN broke his wrist and missed most of training camp. And if we remember how his rookie season went, it didn't go well. He stepped into a receiving room with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, a pretty crowded one, under Shane Waldron, which I know it was a nightmare, but Luther Burden's doing the same thing. He's stepping into a room with DJ Moore, with Rome Odunze, who was drafted in the top 10 last year, Colston Loveland, who was just taken in the top 10 at the tight end position. And it's going to be hard for him to compete for targets, especially if he misses, early on in training camp and whatnot, and misses that valuable time with his quarterback. And I think if we're going to see any type of production from Luther Burden, it's going to be late down the stretch of the season, or if they move DJ Moore. But, understanding this context before the season, especially if you drafted Luther Burden in your rookie draft and you were hoping that he produces for you this upcoming season, I don't think that's going to be the case for at least, 60, 70% of the season. And that bet is to be made down the line. So knowing that before going into training camp and kind of getting ahead on this, and especially if you're looking to sell Luther Burden, get him off your roster right now and plug someone into the flex that's, a young receiver who's going to produce for you this year. Maybe you can move off of Luther Burden and, not worry about his value dipping when we hear more things about, how Luther Burden's missing time, how he's wide receiver 4 in the depth chart, how he's not even wide receiver 3. We're going to hear stuff like that. I can almost guarantee you that some of these headlines are going to come out. It's going to scare people. People are going to panic move off of Luther Burden. And us dynasty managers, especially, I think it's important, especially if you're rebuilding. I mean, if you can catch that window and buy Luther Burden for scraps, 70 cents on the dollar, when people hear that he's not even, running with he's running with the second team offense and he's not really getting on the field at all, it's going to be a perfect buying opportunity and something we need to realize right now and kind of just anticipate it down the line. And if you holding Luther Burden, you're competing and you want to get off him for a flex piece, do it now. I think, especially, getting ahead of this stuff and getting competing pieces on your roster to help you now before this, Luther Burden, evidently his value goes down is incredibly important. Luther Burden is a guy I am holding. I'm super high on too. And I'm not too worried, especially as if I'm, holding him on a rebuilding team. Don't panic on Luther Burden, okay? If you're holding him for late season, spike production possibility or into 2026, hold him. Do not get rid of him. He's a guy I think is going to slot right into that DJ Moore role because I don't know how much longer DJ Moore is going to be on this team. With this regime, we had heard the stuff about Ben Johnson not loving, taking shots at him, kind of, how the effort last year and how DJ Moore's already said he's going to have like a downtick in touches this upcoming season, and that's not great news. So that could be also a plus leading into Luther Burden's value down the stretch. It's something to look out for, guys. So pay attention to these things, stay on top of it, and capitalize on these windows coming up for Luther Burden. But really, don't panic, don't sell him, hold him on your roster. All right, okay, so I want to talk about the quarterback battle in Indianapolis between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, and this is a super important topic because it's going to determine the fate of Downs, Pittman, and Warren, the receiving options in this offense, and just how much they will produce or won't produce in 2025. I think, in my opinion, if Daniel Jones starts a majority of the season, we're in the clear. I think it is great to have as many, I don't think you can go overboard in buying, these players and, trying to get them on your team just because of the risk in general. And we know Daniel Jones hasn't been the greatest in the past, but he's shown to be competent in getting the ball out to his receivers. And if we see Anthony Richardson come out though, a lot of the season and start games, I think it's not going to be good for these Indianapolis receiving options. He pretty much killed the value of Michael Pittman last season. We saw Michael Pittman this time last season. He was at wide receiver 20 on Keep Trade Cut. He's now dropped down to wide receiver 48. I mean, that is a huge fall and something I don't want to be taking a risk on, especially with a guy like Tyler Warren coming into his rookie season. He could lose a ton of value if Anthony Richardson is the quarterback. He killed Josh Downs' value and Michael Pittman. Couldn't get the ball to them, can't get the ball out accurately, can't throw the ball downfield. And if Daniel Jones, like I said, starts, I think we're okay. I also think Daniel Jones is a sneaky buy in Dynasty right now. I think if you can get him for a third, if you can get him super cheap on your roster, especially if you have Anthony Richardson and kind of just run that quarterback duo back and forth, it'd be perfect for your Dynasty team, especially as a quarterback three. If you're really hurting at quarterback two and you're desperate, that's a great buy option. I'm not super high on Anthony Richardson, but I think standalone value as an asset in Dynasty, just producing as a quarterback in Superflex, I think he's a fine option, but he kills the value of Downs and Pittman and Warren. And I'm worried about them if Richardson starts a majority of the season. But we've had reports that have shown that Richardson's shoulder flared up again, that, the one that he had struggling with last year. And I hate that for him because I think what could have been for Anthony Richardson is, it's out there. There's a world where Anthony Richardson excels in Indianapolis and he figures it out. But I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be in this reality. So I think it's good to know this context right now. Richardson's hurt, banged up. There's early reports that Daniel Jones could start week one of the season, and that bodes well for us, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, and Tyler Warren owners. Um, so I think this context is incredibly important, and I think people should be paying more attention to this stuff. And there's huge buy windows on guys like Daniel Jones right now that you should take advantage of. I'm going to be trying to take advantage of it as well. If I need a quarterback three, if I have Anthony Richardson on my team, go out and buy Daniel Jones. Just see what you can get from out there. To top this off, this is going to be an important quarterback battle that we need to be keeping an eye on this offseason, especially going into training camp. Because if Anthony Richardson is begged up and it's a full go for Daniel Jones, I think it's a huge green light for Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, and Tyler Warren. So, guys, right now, take advantage of it. Buy some of these guys low, especially hearing this Daniel Jones news. Go buy Daniel Jones if you can, and invest in this offense that you can. Because I think it's going to surprise a lot of people if Jones starts a majority of the season. And I trust Shane Steichen. Like I said, guys, just try to look out for this news, pay attention, and stay on it.